encounter.
It feels very
Hello and welcome to the Unwanted Opinion podcast, the show in which me and my friends give our unwanted opinion on all things film. My name is Lewis, and I'm joined today with my good friend Gonzalo.
Hey.
Hey, how you doing, Gonzalo?
Oh, I'm good. Missing Kyle again.
Good. Missing Kyle. Kyle is just... He's an alien to us now. He'll might never be seen again. Nah, kidding on. I'm sure he'll be back next week. I've told him to watch films for next week, so he better be back. But yes, today will be our very belated Halloween episode, and we are going to be covering some classic horror films, some of our favourite classic horror films from decades past. And also we'll have reviews for the new Netflix stop-motion animated film Wendell Wild and the new indie horror film Barbarian. So that'll be all on today's show. Ready to go, Gonzalo?
Oh, I am more than ready.
Ready, yes. So yeah, we did modern horror last week. We obviously
we did.
went over sort of eras, mini eras and things like that, and contemporary horror and things that are popular, and just the kind of more niche stuff that we liked and things, as well as indie art house horrors, obviously. Make a rise. Exactly. But let's talk about old school horror. The old age. From the 20s and onwards.
Yeah. So the fun thing about horror, I feel like, as a film genre, Lewis, is that horror has pretty much been with us almost since the beginning of film itself. One of the earliest film movements was German Expressionism. I think I might have talked about this many times because I really like German Expressionism. It started this trend of doing horror films. And you've heard of Nosferatu, you've heard of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. All these films that explore the idea of using the visuals of the scenery, warped landscapes, and light and shadow, and using that high contrast in order to make everyone piss their pants back in the 1920s.
I mean, Caligari has a really effective mood and atmosphere. I think.
Yes,
and that's obviously given to the aesthetic and the expressionism of the time, and just it's just so creepy. It's that's the perfect way to describe that film. I think it's just such a creepy film.
Yeah, it's a very kind of
the sets and the shadows and things.
Yeah, it's a very kind of psychological kind of horror as well. It's one of the first cases that we have, because that's another thing with old film. A lot of the stuff is completely lost and we'll never be able to see, and a lot of new things appear over the years and stuff. But it's one of the earliest cases we have of that very classic. We see the murderer kill someone in the shadow. We see the silhouette of the murder projected on a wall, killing someone. It's one of those earliest things, and you can see those influences from the very beginning of film extend to horror throughout.
Yeah, and like you said, it has a very psychological twist, a twist that's
100%.
If you've seen Martin Scorsese's Shutter Island, it's
pretty
much inspired by that film.
Yeah, pretty much. And then you have things like Nosferatu, which obviously it's this is one of those cases that really makes me very happy, because they were like, hey, we want to do a Dracula movie, but we don't want to buy the rights to Dracula, so let's just give it another name and change things slightly. That one's a more kind of more of a gory kind of horror movie. It has more murder, it has more blood. It's more about less psychological and more about the idea of horror coming into the normal world rather than the normal world being horrific in it of itself. And it's really interesting, because we see that start of a naturalistic way of doing horror, where you have these instead of creating sets of reality that are warped and feel claustrophobic and weird and stuff, they just use more naturalistic settings and just filmed them in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable. And a lot of the different things that they pioneered during this time in film are things that are used throughout the entirety of the history of horror. So let's run through that real quick. So obviously we have the 1920s. That's when these kind of films start, and then in the 30s you have the giant once sound is implemented, you have a giant boom of horror with the classic monsters. Like you get your Frankensteins, your
Mm-hmm.
Mummy, your
Mm-hmm.
Dracula. Like the idea
Yeah.
of taking these literary monsters, and Universal was really big with this, doing like very
Mm-hmm.
dramatized horror. It wasn't
Yes.
just
Yes.
horror, but it felt very,
Mm-hmm.
like stage kind of horror with
Yeah.
like very
Yeah.
dramatic performances. Everything was very deep and over the top and stuff. And these were incredibly successful, so much
I
so
mean,
that
you
they did
have
several
like Bride
versions
of
of each one.
Frankenstein, for example,
Yeah.
is a very, sort of melodramatic
Yes,
horror,
yes, yes.
if you've
Yeah,
ever
yeah,
seen
yeah.
it.
It takes
Yeah.
a very like incredibly like philosophical book and turns it into like this very kind of
Mhm.
like poppy melodramatic thing. It's the
Yeah.
reason these characters like and the way the Universal's monsters specifically designed them have stuck
Mhm.
so much throughout pop
Oh yeah.
culture, because they are very corny in the best of
Yes.
ways.
Yes. Very goofy.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
then you get like the 1940s. You start getting some of the first actually like cinematic universes thanks to the
Mhm.
Universal monsters. We don't talk
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
that enough, but like,
Yeah. That is
uh,
the first cinematic universe.
yeah, the
Absolutely.
first
Uh huh.
cinematic universe was like Universal's like monster stuff. And we're not
Mhm.
talking about the Dark Universe.
No. 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 We're not.
Then you get to like the 1950s and you start getting like that the whole thing with like after the depression and like everyone goes
Mhm.
to watch a lot of movies like to escape the horror that was the 1930s and early 40s in the
Mhm.
US. You get a big boom. You have a young crowd that now has like
Mhm.
a lot of money to spend, and you get the
Yep.
fucking 1950s where you
And you
get
get
the
you
pulpy
like
horror.
yeah, pulp horror, science fiction horror
Yes,
was kind of big in the
yes,
50s.
super
And
big.
even, body snatchers, you had the
Oh
blob,
yes.
thing from another world,
Yes, yes, yes.
which we'll get into
Think
that later, obviously.
think popcorn outside in a
Mhm.
car,
Yes,
and
yes.
you you get
Even
that.
they had a remake of the House of Wax, and they had like
Oh
introduced
wow.
3D. I think was with the House of Wax the first time 3D was
Wow.
used for
Wow.
cinema.
I didn't actually know
Um,
that. That's
as like a
incredible. Yeah.
gimmicky horror, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you do see, like, at this point in time, TV is introduced to the home, and cinemas
Yes.
are competing with the fact that people can
hmm
watch stuff on their TV and don't need to go out to them. So you do
Yeah.
see a lot of like weird gimmicks being introduced to cinema.
Yeah.
You have the drive-ins. You have you start getting like the wider cameras lenses as well. You get the
CinemaScope and stuff like
cinemascopes and
that.
stuff
Yeah.
like that in
hmm
this period.
hmm
You get smell-o-vision. Dude, it's fucking smell-o-vision.
So ridiculous.
That
Yeah.
was an idea where like you smelled the movie while you watched it.
hmm Obviously,
Yeah.
Technicolor was introduced like a decade
Yes,
prior
yes,
anyway. But yeah.
exactly. In the 40s
hmm
and stuff. And
hmm
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it really like gets really like full on poppy. Like we're talking about
Yes. Yeah.
like we're making horror for the teens. We have this
hmm
new kind of like audience of young adults who have spendable income and they want
hmm
to watch the movies outside their house. Therefore,
Yeah.
let's trend like everything is towards them. That's where you get
hmm
like very small like smaller studios like creating a bunch of really low budget pulpy movies that
hmm
basically were written by like they first design a fucking poster and then they write the movie around it
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
it's basically clickbait. They want you to like catch your attention with these like really like catchy things or like this woman in a bikini being carried by an alien from space and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
called Alien Murderers from Mars, like
Yeah.
you get this really like pulpy kind of shit with
hmm
here's where you get like Creature from the Black Lagoon and all that very kind of weird classicy thing, like you said, the Blob and all that stuff. Then we
Yeah.
move on to the 60s, and
Yeah.
here like you get introduced to like they're starting to experiment with the whole idea of like a more serious kind of horror.
Yeah,
Uh,
this is things where
yeah, the
I'd say
haste
the
code is on
60s,
full
70s,
effect.
80s
Yeah, like
kind of gets into the golden age of horror where
exactly,
it's taken
exactly.
far more seriously. Like you said, it's used for like more. I mean, you kind of go back to the psychological
Yeah, yeah,
aspects of
yeah,
it. It kind of
exactly.
becomes a
Like
lot more
you hail
psychological.
back to like the
Uh-huh.
freaking German expressionism a lot.
hmm
Things like, and again, it's all because like the Hays Code got introduced because
hmm
people were going wild. They were like, "Oh, this cinema seems to be influencing children and
hmm
making criminals out of them. So we need to regulate it. We need to
Yeah, yeah,
censor it." And through the fact that they weren't allowed to show a lot, it meant
yeah,
that instead of like going for like, "Hey, we just want to show gore and that's it," and shock value, they have to find different ways of doing
hmm
horror. They have to
absolutely.
find different
Yeah, and
ways.
like you said, we're going from the 50s. We had that pulpy, gimmicky sort of stuff. the production value gets much more sophisticated
Yeah,
here as well.
100%.
hmm
Yeah, that's when you
In
get
terms of
movies
sets and
like
things.
Psychos from the 50s.
Psycho's 1960, 61.
1961. Okay.
And then we'll get to my film.
Yeah.
But we'll quickly go over the 70s and 80s
Yes,
before we
yes.
kind of start the film stuff.
Exactly. And then we get to like again the 70s and 80s. This
Mm-hmm.
we're talking like what do you think about when you think about like at least for our generation when you think horror classics, you basically think 70s and 80s.
Yes.
This was the big boom of visual effects and mixing in with like the like not talking like sorry not visual effects but like special effects like
Mm-hmm.
the things where like you get ILM like going wild, you have all the rubber masks, all the animatronics, all the like using that new technology, those new microchips that allowed people to make like really tiny robots and stuff in order
Mm-hmm.
to like do weird shit with your films. And you still have like that, hey, we have this like people who grew up with both the Hitchcocks and the 50s
Mm-hmm.
pulp making movies now. They're the
Yeah.
directors now, and they're like, hey, so I want to make this crazy shit where like there's some weird aliens and it's kind of funny but kind of horrible. And then you have someone like, oh, I want to make this like super serious, and you get things like The Exorcist or
Mm-hmm.
freaking Gremlins. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
it's a really big mix of things, but they all rely very heavily on really good
Mm-hmm.
practical effects for this
Yeah.
time period. They
Absolutely.
experiment a lot with like their
Mm-hmm.
cameras. They experiment a lot with telling those stories through new technologies that they have just achieved, and it's fucking great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, this is what like what I was talking about last week. Where we kind of talked about modern horror, and I was just
Hmm.
talking about modern horror. What the hell? I can't speak English. When I was talking about sort of audience reputation,
Yeah,
no, audience thinking has sort of the view on horror has kind of changed, and not in a good way.
yeah,
I don't
no,
think. I think a lot
100%.
of people, like I said, look down on horror and see it as just like a jump scare thing and don't
Yeah,
really care.
yeah.
And I think we've lost a lot of like what the 60s, 70s, and 80s produced
Hmm.
in making these really, really beautiful and actually terrifying, atmospheric sort of
Yes, yes.
experiences that actually, about your film, well, when we get to more specifics in our
Yeah.
films in general, like actually have really a lot to say and actually really utilize the genre and just really pushing the atmosphere and actually
Hmm.
just creating a feeling of dread or
Hmm.
creepiness or eeriness,
Yeah, pulling you into
and
it,
also telling really, really human stories. And
Mm,
that's really
yeah.
important. And I just think, like how the 50s horror was very schlocky and pulpy,
Mm.
that's sort of a lot of the way it was kind of we talked about in the 2000s and
Yeah,
10s and stuff like that. It wasn't really taken very seriously, and it
Mm.
still is to a lot of people. Wasn't taken very seriously, and it's a shame.
Yeah, because we have had 2 decades where the most popular horror movies have been
Mm.
objectively bad, and no, nothing is objective, but
No, no, no.
they have been fairly
Mhm.
ostracized and
Mm.
and criticized, and you
Mm.
get films that don't really like haven't really achieved that level of like legendary status that previous ones
Mhm.
have. And not to like take things like completely out and like pretend that it was all good. Like during the 70s and the 80s, you also got a lot of really really bad slasher films. Slasher films were
Yeah,
like
yeah.
very much in the zeitgeist, and you got
Mhm.
really really poor ones. You got a lot of
Mhm.
sequels. You got a lot of like, I mean,
A
we've talked
million
about
Friday the 13th.
exactly. We've talked
Mhm.
about Halloween franchise
Mhm. Yeah,
several
Nightmare on
times in
Elm
this
Street.
channel
Oh my
now,
god.
and you did get that poor quality, and we've always gotten that poor quality. But I feel like the past 2 decades of the
Mhm.
90s and the early 2000s have really left like a bad taste in our mouths. When it
Mhm.
comes to horror,
Mhm.
we've gone back to that idea of like horror as just a sensational thing that teens watch, and it's not a high art. It doesn't say anything else.
Mhm.
And really, it's quite remarkable because it came as like a result of wanting to criticize the societal
Mhm.
structures and
Yeah.
wanting to reflect on on reality. Like German
Mhm.
expressionism was a response to the pre-World War One and post-World War One environment
Yeah.
of Germany at the time,
Absolutely.
seeing that what war does to people and the ostracization and the huge class divides that were ravaging the country at that point. So like it's really interesting how like you go from something that came as a result of like, hey, we want to shock and we want to discuss in order to
Mm-hmm.
say something. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
we think when people now think about horror, they tend to think more about those emotions, but without the
Mm-hmm.
mean underneath. And we
Yeah,
talked
no, yeah,
last week.
exactly.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
all
exactly. Just surface level.
we talked about criticism with things like
Yes,
Marvel
yes, exactly.
and big blockbuster entertainment, and
Mm-hmm.
it's it's for the spectacle, like
Mm.
we talked about Nope criticizing. It's for the
Yes.
spectacle. It's the fast food sort of thing.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
give them the experiential feeling. Don't
Without
give them
the
the
depth.
lasting impression.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And again, we did a whole episode on this and how
Mm-hmm.
we can see that there's a change in the way that horror movies are headed.
Mm-hmm.
We can
Yeah.
see like we can feel that there is a change moving forward,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
the late 2010s and 2020s have given us some really good horror films
Mm-hmm.
that seem to be changing the perception of the genre as
Yeah.
a whole and moving it forward. But today we're going to go back. We're going to go back
Yes.
before
Let's do
the
that. Let's
90s,
do
and
that.
we're going to focus on these periods of classic
Mm-hmm.
movies. So we've both chosen a couple that we can talk to, and I feel like the rest of the show is just going to be praising these movies.
Yes, pretty much, pretty much. Why they're
Yeah,
so good, why they're so good.
yes, why we like
So
them. So good.
obviously,
Yeah.
I will start, and we're going back to 1961 with this little British film called The Innocents. Jack Clayton's The Innocents stars Deborah Kerr as Miss Giddens, and the plot, I just love the time period of this, the way the period of this sets. Gothic Victorian period, right? So there you go.
Yes, yes.
Already, the
Already
atmosphere's
hailing
already
back.
set up for
Yes,
you, right?
exactly.
Gothic Victorian period, and the plot is you have Miss Giddens is the new governess of this house. She goes to this man who's just called the uncle, by the way. Don't really get a name.
Oh.
She sees this man, the uncle, to be the governess of and look after his nephews. And he's like, okay, you have to look after my nephews. Something really bad happened to the last governess, right? It's all very clouded mystery. And I was like, oh yeah, but she did die, right? So something bad happened to the last governess. And he eventually spits out that information out. And basically her job is to go to this big mansion in the countryside and look after the nephews, the niece and nephew, which is Flora and Miles.
Yeah.
What a great setup already. So she then goes to this lonely mansion, and all the persons there is the maid and Flora first. Flora, the niece, right?
Yeah.
And at first everything's great. She's getting on, Miss Giddens is getting on with Flora really well. She's like, oh, this is a lovely time. I love kids. I love Flora. It's all so fantastic and stuff like that. Her arrival into the sort of estate is brilliant because she's just wandering around and you just hear Flora, the little girl, singing. Really creepily, obviously, like a music box or something.
Yeah.
She's just singing by a lake and she's just like, oh, that's really sweet.
It's
and goes down and
fantastic.
sees
It's
her.
like it already gets you in that kind of like Byronic state of like, you
Yeah.
know, like we're not in the city, we're not surrounded by people, we're moving into the isolated countryside, and even though we're in this gigantic manor, you're basically isolated from
Absolutely.
society at this point. There's no one that can help you if anything goes wrong.
Even the
You know?
opening credits are great because it's literally just
Yeah.
opening credits and it's her hands in a prayer pose, and all the rest is just surrounded in darkness, right? And then it ends with a candle being blown out and her whispering, "God save the children," right? Fantastic. Like, what the hell's going on? This is really creepy. What's happened, right?
Yeah.
So eventually, she's looking after Flora. Everything's fantastic, and then she gets a letter from the boarding school telling them Miles has been expelled and that he's coming home. And you don't know why he was expelled, right? And when Miles comes home, he has a certain effect on Flora that's making her act up, and making them misbehave and things like that. And then eventually she's starting to lose control of these kids because of Miles' influence. Well, simultaneously, Miss Giddens thinks she's seeing figures in the house. She thinks she's seeing figures up a tower.
Yeah.
And it's just so atmospheric and perfect. And I love The Innocents because of the atmosphere. And also, see what sticks out to me in this film so much is like the mise en scène, the production, the set.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's so filled. It's so rich. There's so much, like, you feel like the history and the history of this house just through the objects and the settings. It's so perfect. And just the way also that light and shadows, really, it's all shot in black and white. The light and shadows are all used to great effect.
Oh, it's
and also the use of, like, are you seeing reflections in the windows or is someone out there? I love that whole thing.
There
you
is
get to see, like,
there is this like really amazing video essay talking about specifically a movie that I will mention later, but how sometimes like more grainy film, more lower quality kind of like more low quality viewing in terms of horror can be even more horrific than seeing a
Mm-hmm.
crisp, perfect Super HD kind of image
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
of
Yeah.
those like small grainy effects
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in those scenes in the dark. Like this movie is
Yeah.
very white and dark. Like you have
Mm-hmm.
really big contrast. Like you never know if that's someone watching you from behind, if that's an
Yes.
intended thing, or if that's just part of the actual physicality of the film. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, I just
No, no, no.
yeah.
That's exactly why it's so effective. It's so good, and just the whole sort of like there's so much at play. It's like a psychological film.
Hmm.
It's a ghost film. It's a possession film. It's like what? It's a whole blend and like a great blend of horror, and it's the whole sort of like is Miss Giddens just going insane? Like, or are the kids playing a game on her? Who's got the power here? What's happening? It's
The
like
ambiguity,
the
just
ambiguity of it all. Exactly. It's just such a rich.
hmm.
That's it. It's such a rich, atmospheric, and just really fantastic, creepy film of the innocence. I
Yeah.
just thought it was fantastic, and the whole film's available on YouTube for free.
Oh wow, I
Maybe
didn't
I've
know
told YouTube
that.
to take it down there, but the whole thing's
Yeah.
available in HD on YouTube. It's just there. It was so random that it was just there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's
Mhm.
it's from '61, yeah. I was googling to figure out the director and stuff, and turns out they did a remake. Are you aware of the remake?
Wait, the one that came out this year?
Yeah,
Is that what you're thinking of? No,
yeah.
it's not. It's called The Innocence, but
Oh, but
it's
it's
not
different.
actually a
Oh,
remake.
okay,
It's just
okay,
like
okay,
it's just got the same title. It's like
okay,
to do
okay.
with like,
Yes.
although it's to do with children as well. It's like they've
Mm,
got like weird powers, like or
mm,
something like that.
okay.
It's a horror film as well, but it's not. It's not a remake.
Nothing
It's
to
just
do
got
with
the
it.
same
Okay,
title.
because I
Don't know
saw
why.
the title, I saw the fact that it was a horror movie, and
Yeah.
I was like, wait,
Yeah.
really? Did they do a remake of
Yeah,
this?
no, I don't know why they could have
Yeah,
called it
okay.
something else. I mean, it's fair. I think it's a Scandinavian film or something, so it could be
Yeah. Oh, okay.
something else
Could
in
be a bad
Scandinavia.
translation.
But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I was tempted to also talk about Psycho as well,
Yeah.
but I think that a lot of people haven't heard of The Innocence. I think it's more under the radar, and I think it's
It's also a
definitely one
more
people should check out.
plastic
And also,
horror,
we
if you
talked
think
about
about
Psycho.
it.
Psycho, I love Psycho,
Yeah.
but it's definitely more of a thriller. Like it kind of doesn't have. It's not like I mean it has creepy moments and stuff like that, but it's definitely more of a thriller than a horror, I'd say. But yeah, The Innocence, Jack Clayton, check it out. You won't
Fantastic.
regret it.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a more classic horror. If you're in for
Oh
like
yeah,
some
most
spooky
definitely.
times,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is gothic manners,
yeah.
ghosts,
Like, how can you not
possessions.
just
Like,
love Gothic manor and
so
ghosts with
so
beautiful
good.
cinematography and rich,
Ah,
mise en
like
scène? Like, I mean,
lady
am I not
in a
selling it to
white
you there?
gown walking around the halls with a candelabra. Like, come on, man.
Oh,
Come on.
it's perfect. It's perfect. What's your
Yeah,
first
yeah,
pick?
yeah. This is fantastic. Yeah,
Mhm,
that is a fantastic
mhm.
pick. I'm going to go for the sake of it in chronological order.
Uh-huh.
So,
Okay.
as I've said many times before on this show, I'm really not that big of a horror farm because
Yeah.
I'm a scaredy cat. I get really fucking scared really fucking easy. But the thing that got me into horror when I first started watching any horror films was the special effects. I
Mhm,
talked about
mhm.
the 80s and the 70s and 80s like really fondly
Yeah.
because at some point actually in my life I did almost go to study to like become like an effects artist, like
Oh wow.
doing makeup arts and
Uh-huh.
like sculpting masks and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I was really passionate about like that whole world, and watching the making ofs of like a bunch of like sci-fi movies with my dad really got me into this world and really like gave me like a real big interest in it. And there's no like I feel like this is like the classic example of traditional VFX being used, not VFX,
Mhm.
sorry, effects. I'm gonna keep fucking up that a
Yeah,
while.
it's alright.
But, yeah, like traditional special effects being used in a movie to great effect than Alien.
Alien.
So Alien,
Can't go wrong
James,
with Alien.
sorry, Ridley Scott's Alien. James
Mhm.
Cameron did the second one. This one's fully horror. I'm not talking about the second one, even though I like it a lot, just because it's
Yeah.
an action movie.
Yeah.
But Alien,
It's a bit scary at points, but it's more of
yeah,
an action
it's
film
an
for sure.
action film though. 1979. So this is like the edge of the 80s.
Yes.
This film absolutely like revolutionized like a lot of aspects of what we understand about like
Mhm.
sci-fi horror. Like we were talking about beforehand, you had the whole very campy alien invaders from Mars
Mhm.
take hot girl and want to destroy world kind of like narratives and
Yeah.
stuff. But this film really grounded that feeling of like space travel and made you feel not only the horrors of like an alien, but like the horrors of like the environment itself,
Yeah.
the idea of
Absolutely.
being out in
Mhm.
space. Like the tagline for this film was "In space, no one can hear you scream."
I
Uh,
think even have you ever seen
yeah.
the original trailer for this film?
Ooh, I have.
It's one of the best
It's really
trailers
good.
ever. It's
Oh,
so intimidating, and it's just that
oh my God.
noise,
Yes,
and
the
it's just
constant
as the words
humming
being
of the
put
machine.
together. Oh, it's
Oh,
horrible.
oh.
It's really
The
scary
empty
actually.
hallways, the oh my God. It's honestly, it's really fucking effective. I feel like we need to go back to and revisit the art of trailer making
Mhm. Oh
because
yeah,
we just do very standard trailers nowadays and
yeah.
it
It's all very. You can kind of predict. You can kind of predict
yeah.
the structure and format of them.
Oh
Absolutely.
yeah. There's like there's this really fun video called like I think it's like every trailer ever or something
Hmm.
like that, and it's literally just text on a white background with noise,
Yeah. Hmm.
and it's the basically the structure of it. But sorry, getting on a tangent again. I love
Yes.
getting on
Yes.
tangents. This is why
Yeah.
we need Kyle here, you know, because Lewis, you're gonna join me in this tangent. We need Kyle
Yeah. I
to
like
snap us
indulging you.
off.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so Alien. So basically, this film presents us within this ship, the Nostromo. And the genius thing about this film, you were talking about, like the grounded nature of the
Hmm.
story. This is a fantastical story where people that travel through space get capped like accidentally like get an alien on board and get systematically hunted and murdered. Okay,
Yes.
that's a
Yes.
fantastical
By this.
premise, but this movie grounds itself like in this universe incredibly well. To start
Hmm.
off with, we're not with like some fantastical journeying heroes. We're not following a military trained militia. No, we're with a bunch of space truckers, basically.
Hmm.
These are
Yes.
like blue collar workers. They're transporting goods from one side of the galaxy to another. It's their day to day, it's their 9 to 5. We're grounded in this like hellscape of machinery and smoke and empty hallways with these people who are just doing their fucking jobs, and they get this like alert like ping, there's something seems to need rescue and stuff, and they're legally required to go check it
Yes.
out.
Yeah.
None of them want to fucking go
Yeah.
check it
Yeah.
out, but they're legally required to. And they go down to this planet and they find a crashed spaceship that does not look human at all. It's this
Nope.
giant weird alien thing.
Even
And
the
in
planet they land on is just.
Oh, it's
It's
so
literally should just
fucking
be called
inhospitable.
Dread. It's not
Yes,
nice.
yes, it's not nice. But that's the thing
Yeah.
this movie does so well. It makes you feel like space is fucking hostile. It's
Yeah.
not just the threat of aliens. Like for the first half of this movie, there are no fucking aliens. You're
Nope.
just like walking with these people through inhospitable lands, and you're like, holy shit, space wants to kill you. You know,
Hmm.
like this is just
Absolutely.
shit. Their life is crap. I
Hmm.
don't want to be out here. There is no sunlight, even when they get planetside. You never see the
Yeah.
fucking sun in this movie. You're
Yeah.
either in the vacuum of space or in a foggy, fucking freezing hellscape.
Horrible thing. Yep.
Yeah, and they land here and they find these ruins that are incredibly designed. Like the design in this movie is so good. The way they contrast the hard square edges of the Nostromo, like the
Hmm.
very industrialized human technology, with like these weird kind of like pseudo erotic
Yes.
wavy way that they designed like the alien
Ancient
spaceship.
sort
Oh,
of civilization, yet
yes, yes.
blended with tech. It's strange.
Yes, yes, it's
Yeah.
so weird and it feels
Mhm.
very biological, but
Yeah.
not in a gross way. It's not
Yeah.
like you can like not like the Tyranids in 40K.
Yeah.
Like you don't think the space is alive, but you
Yeah.
feel like the way it grooves and moves around.
Mm.
I don't
I
almost
know.
feels like Dali
I
architecture. You know, you're like, what the fuck is going on here?
so much of that has to be attributed to H.R. Geiger,
Yes, H.R.
who
Geiger
is
did such
a
a
Swiss
good job.
artist.
Yes.
and concept artist for this film, I'm pretty sure,
Incredibly
who just
groundbreaking job.
who designed all this really horrifying imagery and
Yeah.
so much of the world and the sets and things like that. And obviously he created the design for the alien, which was actually he thought up in his nightmares. It was a creature that showed up in his dreams, and he was like, "That was terrifying. I better draw that." And then obviously Ridley Scott used it. So you're literally seeing a creation
Nightmare
from
Fuel.
nightmares.
It's incredible
on
because
film.
a lot of the actual like designs of this movie, the ones that are supposed to be horrific and alien and uncomfortable feeling, they all hail a lot from like human genitalia shapes.
Yes,
and
it's all very,
incredible.
like you said, it's all very sexual.
They use
and
like
almost
that
invasive.
exactly.
Stuff,
they contrast that kind of like inherent like understanding of sexuality and organs and stuff with like this like hostileness and constant sharpness and danger and stuff, and it really manages to get you uncomfortable. Like even after years and years, this film being like parodied 1,000 times, you can still watch the scenes of them descending into this cavernous like empty halls of this alien spaceship, and you still feel fucking weird. You still feel like this is a really hostile environment that's just like I don't know what any of this is. I don't understand it, but I don't like it. You know, it manages to really trigger that part of your brain that and it's done fantastically, honestly. So for the rest of the movie, basically, just to sum it up, even if you know what's happening, this is one of those movies that 100% just watch it. It's so fucking good.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It's so amazing. My sister got me because they played it at the DCA. They did like a remaster edition.
Was it an anniversary thing or something?
Yeah, for an anniversary. And my sister got me some tickets for my birthday. And holy shit, it looked so good on the big screen. I had never seen it on the big screen before. Oh, it's brilliant. But yeah, basically, they check this place out and they find this room full of eggs. And one of them gets near one on a face hugger, which is what the thing is called. Basically,
the baby
an alien
aliens,
creature,
I guess, are called.
Yeah, just like attaches to his face, and they bring him into the spaceship. And they're like, "Holy shit, let's try to save him!" Blah blah blah. So after hours of this tension, which is great because like it feels like not that much happens in the movie. You know, like if you like breaking down fact by fact, like it's really not that much, but like the atmosphere, the way that they take their time with every new thing, it's really refreshing. Like whereas like nowadays in the Alien sequels and stuff, it's like they have to introduce a new fucking version of the xenomorph every 50 minutes in order for you to like pay attention or something.
I mean, we could go on a whole spiel about Prometheus, Alien Covenant, and all the sequels, and yes, it's not good.
But it's really interesting how they managed to just like go so slowly and make you like really like fucking sit on what's happening. You're not allowed to like get away to the next thing. You have to sit.
And there's even like
what's going on,
because obviously John Hurt's the person who gets the facehugger attached to his helmet and then is like in a coma for like a certain amount of a few days or something. And it's that whole thing. It's like, I won't spoil everything here, but it's like when he wakes up, there's that whole element of like you're kind of put on the back foot because as an audience member, you're like, well, that wasn't supposed to happen. Why is he just like it's all okay?
Especially
and
if
stuff
you
like
know
that.
like the story and stuff. Like it's one of those things that even if you know what's going to happen, it just catches you by surprise every time. You know. And I love how like a lot of this movie is them having conversations about how they're going to handle this, like them debating about like what's going on, what are we going to do about this, what's happening. There's a really interesting subplot about like the fact that maybe what happened to them wasn't an accident. Maybe this was like they were like this was part of like a corporation's greedy just like attempt at getting a specimen so they could fucking sell it, I guess.
Into it and the perfect organism as it's called.
And it's really fascinating. You basically end up with Ridley, Sigourney Weaver's character, just like surviving the whole experience barely, and managing to finally destroy this destroy this alien, who isn't even killed by the vacuum of space, which is fucking
Yeah.
terrifying. But yeah, and
Yeah.
it's really tense. It's really good, and by the
Mm.
end of it, you're left like just breathing, just
Yeah,
sigh of
yeah.
relief.
I mean,
But
there's
yes,
the whole
yeah.
thing because obviously there's whole philosophy of
Hmm.
Alien, and there's a whole book called The Philosophy of Ridley Scott,
Yeah.
which you can read about, and obviously goes into stuff like that. But there's that whole thing which he tried to then go further into in Prometheus and Alien Covenant. Is this whole thing about how small we are as the
Mm.
human race, and how. I mean, you do feel it in this film. I think this film's
Yeah.
effective at telling you how
Oh,
grand, like you said, and scary space is, and like fate has so much to do with it. Is it fate, and it's like how actually powerless we are in the universe, and that
mm.
he obviously wanted to create this whole kind of like, and this whole kind of like fable and sort of rich history with purely through art and design and sets and
Yeah.
stuff like. So you were talking about the engineer's spaceship and all that stuff. There's literally. They're just walking through so much history, and it's like, what's
Yes,
actually
yes.
going on here? What
I
are
feel
these
like
things called engineers?
that's one of
Like,
the
it's
best
just
things
so
that they
interesting.
do, like
Mm.
environmental storytelling. Like they don't feel like they have to explain every single thing to
No.
the audience, but it
Well,
also
he felt the
does.
need to when he reached 70, but I
Yes.
don't know why. I don't know
let's
why he had to do that.
yes, let's ignore
But,
his later works and focus on this movie. But yeah,
yeah, it is
like
a shame.
it is the refreshing way where like they don't explain every single thing that's going on or why or where it comes from to the audience. And in order to give you that sense of dread, that sense that you're only getting like a really fucking tiny speck of the whole story,
Mhm.
but at the same time, it feels like they themselves know that story.
Yes.
And I feel like that's what like is missing in a lot of modern films, where like you watch
Mhm.
them and you're like, yes, they didn't really explain it, but I also doesn't feel like they knew themselves what the
Mhm.
fuck was going on. Here, they
Yeah.
clearly put so much work and so many hours into like understanding and writing a compelling
Yeah.
narrative and world building, but then they're just like, okay, we're just gonna tell them this very small bit. There's gonna be things that we're just never gonna fucking pay off, but
Mhm.
it's fine because
It's
they
fine.
don't need to be
But
paid
it's
off.
still it's still a very effective, complete
Incredible,
story. It's
yes,
just so
100%.
like like I
You
was
don't
saying with
need any
Instance, it's
sequels
just
to
so
this film.
rich in
Yeah.
environment and stuff like that. It's fantastic.
Alien is one of those films where if they had never done any sequels,
Mhm.
which I know is impossible given the box office numbers that this movie pulled, but if they hadn't done any sequels at all, it would still work completely fine and even
Mhm.
better, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's
Although people contend Aliens is also. I mean,
yeah,
I think Aliens is
Aliens
a
is
great film, a
yeah,
fantastic
fucking
film.
love Aliens,
Yeah, very different film. Very different
No,
film.
completely
like you said,
different
but
film. Yeah, it's the kind of thing where I kind of miss this with like modern IPs. The idea of just exploring the universe through a different story. You know,
yeah, they're a
it's
different genre
tonally completely
entirely.
different, completely different genre. It's just hey,
Yeah.
let's see another story in this universe. It does have the same protagonist, but apart from that, is very much a completely different
Very
kind of
different
tale.
film. Very
Yeah.
different film. Yeah. Well, anyway, for my final pick, let's
Yes.
jump back to 1973 for this
Yes, let's go back. Let's
And
go
I'm
back a couple
going
years.
one. William Friedkin's The Exorcist.
Yes, I knew you were going to
Absolute
choose this
horror
one. You
classic.
fucking
One that
love this
I
movie.
adore. I adore The Exorcist so much,
Yeah.
right? I'll get into why, right? So everyone knows the plot of The Exorcist, right?
Yes.
You have a little girl, Regan, played by Linda Blair, who one day, she's just a sweet little girl, and it's like, oh, you get a little insight into her life with her mum, Chris, played by Ellen Burstyn. And it's like, oh, she's just a sweet little girl and stuff like that. And then she just slowly becomes stranger, and it's sort of like her daughter is slowly being distanced from her. And then, of course, it's because her daughter is being possessed by the devil. Chris's daughter is being possessed by the devil. But what's so effective about this film for me at first is that I don't think I've really watched many horror films, but this is the one that stands out to me just because how affected I was by it. That genuinely made me tear up because of just how emotionally, taxing this is on you. It's a really effective piece because what you have here is this mother throughout the whole first 2/3 of this film, really, is that you have this mum who she's secular, she's not religious in any way, and obviously the idea of your daughter being possessed by the devil is probably the last thing you'd ever think of, right? Of what's going on wrong with her, right? So you watch her go through every single idea and thought and trying to figure out. It's just a mum trying to figure out what's wrong with her daughter. She takes her to so many scientists and doctors and that, and they have meetings and things like that, and yet no one no one has an answer. It's like nothing's wrong with your daughter, nothing's wrong with her brain, and so you're seeing this woman basically break down and just be like, how can no one actually figure out what's wrong with my daughter? Like, how is this fair? It's just such a horrible the whole situation. It's just this woman who cannot possibly understand what could be going wrong.
Yeah.
And then, of course, she reaches out to Father Karras, played by Jason Miller. And eventually she then actually and I love this scene because if you watch on YouTube or anything, which is like, it's like, what do you know about an exorcism? And even when she's saying it, she's like shy to even say the words out of the words. It could be like, this is so ridiculous. Why like how would that be possible? And even like when the Father Karras who's having a crisis of faith in himself, because of like a horrible incident that happened in his past, that he's even like, what are you talking about? Why are you bringing up an exorcist and stuff like that? It's like, this is a whole like clouded, this is something you don't really want to do. It's like, why would you bother coming to me about that? It's kind of ridiculous. But it's because it's you're seeing a woman in such desperation that she will literally try anything to save her daughter. And of course, she is being possessed by the devil, so what are the odds? There you go. Going to a priest. But obviously from there, as more traditional horror stuff happens, it's a really effective body horror film. You see, I mean, it is at the time it was definitely very, very provocative and caused a lot of controversy because you're seeing this little girl who's being mutilated and twisted about and vomiting and stabbing herself, and it's a whole like. On that front, it's very, very horrific on that alone.
Yeah, like we were talking about, like it's that mixture of that like raw, like kind of like horror thing where it's like, hey, we're just like wanting to shock you,
Yes.
But this movie mixes it with like that incredible psychological build-up. Like by the time you're seeing this girl twist herself and contort herself and projectile vomit, like you've invested so much into the story that it truly like gets under your skin. And I feel like that's the incredible thing that this movie does, because a lesser movie would just have that be the entirety of it.
Most possession films pretty much have just done exactly. that. Yes, it's just that's it.
They looked at that and they said, oh, it's because of the weird climbing on the wall thing. Yeah, let's do that and let's leave it at that. But it's really that like connection that you have with this mother, with her relationship with her daughter, that desperation, the relationship with the dad, and like his faith, and like that whole character, like you were saying, like it's this groundedness that really elevates whenever something outstanding happens. You need that contrast,
Obviously, I think this is just like films from the 70s in general have a really raw and honest look to them, just aesthetically, just through the way they're filmed in the cameras and the actual film tapes they use. But I just love this whole idea as well. You have this priest, Father Karras, who is. What a better way, like most films, if you have these priests or someone who has a crisis of faith, they usually see something beautiful and miraculous to get them to believe again. Where this is the other way around, it's like something horrible and disastrous is actually the thing that will actually sort of make him believe again. But even him, who's a religious man, constantly throughout the whole thing is questioning and being like doubtful of like, nah, this can't be real, this can't be the devil. But yeah, it's just a really moving, and actually is terrifying and moving, and it's just really effective, and you're just watching like a family sort of just struggle and break down. And also that's the whole thing, it's like tragedy and crisis are so they're such a rich part, such an important part of The Exorcist itself. It really is a fantastic film, and everyone has great story arcs and character arcs, and it's beautifully shot. It's just fantastic. It's The Exorcist. I mean, What else?
It's just a good
fantastic
movie.
stuff.
Yeah.
Very good film. Very good film. I don't know if me gushing over there was enough to recommend you see it, but
I still haven't finished this movie because it just fucking got me so hard. I was like, okay, I gotta stop. I gotta walk away. This is fucking scary. And again, I feel like I've seen more horrific imagery.
Yes.
Like being someone who was born in '98, I've definitely been exposed to way more horrific and way more traumatizing and way more body horror kind of imagery. But it's not that gets you really in The Exorcist. That's like the crescendo.
Mm-hmm.
It's that slow psychological buildup
Yes,
that
yes.
fucking tears you apart.
And
It's
it's like you
fantastic.
can sort of feel
Hmm.
like the devil's presence in it.
Mm.
Like you can feel like, I mean, obviously there is like
Oh,
you
and
do get like really there is
let's.
this really scary moment where it's just like all of a sudden like
Mhm.
Father Karras is walking down the street and then it just cuts to
Mm.
some horrifying thing's face, which is like meant to be the devil, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it's like you could feel devil's presence in this film where you have
Mm.
you've this priest doesn't no longer believes anymore, so the
Mm.
devil's beating him, and then you've got this the devil beating Chris, and
Mm.
that whole thing where it's like it's almost like he is laughing throughout the whole picture, like he's
Yes.
winning throughout the whole picture, and it's like a really
It's just
horrible
toying with
thought,
them.
but it's
Yeah.
like that presence is sort of felt within the film, and it's a really really particular thing that Friedkin does
Oh,
so well.
it really is.
Great
Honestly,
film.
and like, let's like mention just the
Hmm.
soundtrack of this movie.
Brilliant.
Oh
It's
my god.
brilliant score.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
It's fucking excellent. Oh, it's so good. Sorry. This is a
I
very
mean,
good movie. This is this is so
yeah,
why
it's
Kyle
a very
is
good
here
film.
to just say, okay,
Yeah.
stop guys, next film. Keep going.
Next film.
We're almost an
But yeah,
hour in.
yes, that is Exorcist. William Friedkin's
Yeah.
Exorcist. Go check out. It's actually turns 50 next year, so I'm sure
Oh,
you could wait till next year it comes out in cinemas, most likely.
oh yeah,
But
yeah,
yes,
probably,
what will
hopefully.
be your final film for today, Gonzalo?
So my final film, just to hammer on the point that Gonzalo likes monster-driven horror movies, I'm
Hmm.
going to go with John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yes.
This is slightly later than Alien. This
Yeah.
is 82.
Yep.
And god damn, I fucking love this movie. So this film again, very similar premise, but very differently executed. Whereas Alien explores like that feeling of isolation and that feeling of entrapment in space, this one takes it to the North Pole. Yay! South Pole, actually. Sorry, my bad. So you get a bunch of scientists in the South Pole, and the interesting thing about the premise of this movie is that I mean you can see a lot of like echoes of like Lovecraft in this,
Mhm.
like Mount on the Mountains of
Yes.
Madness kind
Yes.
of thing. It basically like takes that and puts it full on 80s energy on it. So this film follows a group of scientists that are on this base, remote base in the middle of the South Pole, and it's really interesting because it starts with a chase scene. We see these people in a helicopter firing down on a dog, and this dog is approaching our like where the movie will take place, this science kind of like compound in the middle of the South Pole, and we have no fucking clue why they're shooting at a dog and being so adamant about killing this specific black dog. And the helicopter ends up crashing, and our protagonists are like, "What the fuck just happened? I have no
Yeah.
idea." These they seem to be from this other place. I think I know where these scientists are coming from because they're from a different base. Blah blah blah. They put the dog in with the rest of the dogs, and they go check it out. And it turns out this other base had discovered something under the ice, and there was this gigantic ship under the
Hmm.
ice that they uncovered. And when they get back to the base, they realize that this dog is not a dog at all, but this weird shape shifting goop of a creature that
Hmm.
just kind of like in the same vein of the alien, where like the alien was based on like your, you know, like the design is more of like, oh, your worst nightmares personified. This is like anything. The idea
Yes.
behind the thing is that it's called the thing because we have no fucking clue what it actually looks like.
Hmm.
It just a bunch of like aggressiveness, like it just it's this blob basically that
Yeah.
just ship shapes into everything. It takes the shapes of things and adds more teeth and more sharpness and more legs and stuff, and just keeps ship shaping. So the difference between these two movies is, whereas in Alien it's a case of let's survive this thing together, in The Thing it's a case of you don't know who
Yeah.
the fuck is human at some point
Yeah.
in
Who
this
to
movie.
trust? Hmm.
Exactly, because this is a ship-shifting alien that can like turn into anyone, replicate anything, and it's really interesting how they try to like work together. The tensions are high. There's scenes in this film where like you have no fucking clue who's who, whether
Mm-hmm.
anyone in the room is actually human being at that point, because it also replicates. So it could be like a bunch of them are the alien. It's like really, really interesting. It's really tense. It's really like yeah, horrific in a more kind of like body horror way than
Yeah.
Alien is. Alien
Is
is way
this the
more
film that got
psychological.
you interested in doing
Yeah.
makeup and practical effects stuff?
It's not, but it's one
Because
of
of,
the ones I
but one
explored
of.
after getting into it,
Right.
because
Mm-hmm.
the special effects in this movie are fucking wild. Like
Yeah.
they are so amazing. Like they use like such like they mix the idea of like stop motion with like a mixture of freaking like reverse shooting. Like there's this scene in the morgue when they're dissecting a
Mm-hmm.
guy who they think is like they're trying to revive a guy who they think is dead. And it turns out this guy isn't actually dead, but is the thing. And its head gets cut off
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
sprouts legs and starts walking around.
Yeah.
So the way they did the leg sprouting is super interesting. They basically pulled the legs back into the head and
Mm-hmm.
then played it in reverse. And you see like techniques like that used throughout the movie completely like seamlessly in a way where like even when you can tell that what you're looking at isn't real, when you can
Mm-hmm.
tell that it's either a puppet or an animatronic or something, the fact that it's like present
Yes.
really gives it like a physicality that you
Mm-hmm.
don't get like with a lot of very rushed VFX that they do nowadays. You know, like
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
when you don't when you get
So
like
it's all about, the tangibility of things.
yeah,
Like you
exactly.
could touch that.
Exactly,
It
exactly.
has a
The actors
texture.
interact with it in
Mm-hmm.
a really interesting way, and not to tear down VFX. VFX are absolutely amazing, and
No.
when they're actually given the budget and the time to
Yes.
do a good
Yes.
job,
Yeah.
they are mind blowing. But it does give it this really like it excuses its maybe pitfalls with the physicality it
Mm.
has. It allows that interaction with the actors and that very kind of like I wouldn't say grounded at all because it's incredibly cartoony, but that kind of very tangible
Yeah.
kind of
I mean, we talked
feel.
about the,
Yeah.
the pulp sci-fi horror of the
Mm.
50s, and obviously this is a remake of The Thing from
Yes,
Another World.
from another world,
And
exactly.
it has that. Does it have that sort of similar pulpy energy,
Yes
but a
and
bit more
no.
serious, a bit more
Yes
intense?
and no,
Huh.
exactly. Like it does
Mm,
play with those ideas. That's why I feel like Alien and The Thing are such different films.
mm-hmm.
Like it does feel like someone who was a big fan of that pulpy or kind of like 50s sci-fi horror.
Yeah.
Took this and merged it with like the current 80s kind of like way of filmmaking. It
Yeah.
feels sort of like an action movie at points. It has very kind of like explosions and
Mm-hmm.
it has like this male protagonist who's supposed to be this kind of like badass
Yes, Kurt Russell.
scientist kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's Kurt
Yeah.
Russell, so like you get that kind of
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But also it introduces a lot of that like weird, unsettling psychological thing we're talking about, and even if it's in a lesser way, those
Mm-hmm.
scenes where it's just a couple of guys just talking, trying to
Yes.
figure out what the fuck is going on, are elevated by the context that they're in and make like feel very incredibly suspenseful. Even the ending of the film
Oh
is
yeah.
incredibly ambiguous in a way where like if you paid it enough attention, you know that it's not
Mm.
a happy ending.
No.
But it really requires like very intense viewing to
Mm-hmm.
realize that they didn't win, you know?
Yeah.
And it's really fantastic, honestly. It's a heck of a watch. It's really
Yes.
fun, and like if if you can get through like some of the gore in this film, just know
Mm-hmm.
it's not realistic gore. It's incredibly stylized gore.
Yeah.
uh, it's really enjoyable and it's horrific in a very fun way. I feel like this is like it's the edge of like pulpy and worth a while, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just writing that line of that this is a bit too much, but also nah,
Yeah.
that was really fucking good.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
It's not just it's just over a B movie, you know. It's like this is
Exactly,
into
exactly. It's
like
just a
proper
step
stuff.
above
Yeah.
a B movie
Mm.
and a step below something like Alien. You know,
Mhm.
it's like it writes that line perfectly, and it has a great cast who like play that really subtle thing very well, but also the exaggerated action scenes for like weird kind of like transformation things. And Stan Winston did such a fucking good job with the effects of this movie. Like, oh my god, I could watch
It's
breakdowns
still impressive. I
of
know
the.
they did.
It's so
Well,
brilliant.
people thought this was a remake, but it's actually not. It's the
Yeah.
prequel to. In
Hmm.
2011, they released a film called The Thing,
Yes.
and everyone thought it was everyone and the trailers and stuff that came out. Everyone thought, oh no,
Felt
it's a
like a remake.
remake of The Thing. Oh no, it's going to be terrible. But it's actually a prequel to this
Yes.
film.
It explores what happened to the first people
Yes,
who
the first
encountered
group.
the ship.
The
Yeah,
Thing. Yeah,
before the dog escapes, kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
I
like
haven't actually
that,
seen this.
I know. I remember
Hmm.
watching like a whole YouTube in depth
Hmm.
making of thing because it was a whole practical versus
Visual
practical
effect.
effects
Yeah.
versus visual effects,
Hmm.
CGI and computer
Hmm.
generated effects. And it was there was a scene where I think someone, you know how they have the in the thing they have the guy's chest which turns into teeth, and then
Yes, and
he's
bites
doing
down on the yeah, because they're trying to resuscitate him
yeah, resuscitate him, yeah.
with like the weird clear boom,
Defibrillators,
whatever
thank you. I was thinking it was
defibrillators. Thank you so
defibrillator.
much.
Yeah, he pushes the
Defibrillators.
defibrillator
Yes,
down.
he pushes it
The,
on the chest opens in a
yeah,
weird mouth like thing and like
but
absolutely
yeah,
chomps down on his arms.
bites his
Yes.
arms off. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's that sort of thing where I think someone's being revealed to be the thing, and like their
Hmm.
body's turning into the mouth thing, and then their
Hmm.
head, their whole face changes, stuff like that. And originally they made a whole model and a whole
Hmm.
practical effect for it, but then they just decided to go for the CGI one instead, which looks really fake and bad. And it's just like. You
That's
surely,
fucking
if you're going to do a prequel to the thing, you got to go all out with it, man.
Yeah,
You got to do
yeah,
the old school stuff. But oh well.
exactly. Then again, they've done sequels to Jurassic Park, and they definitely haven't paid
That's
homage to
very
the.
very sad and true.
Yeah.
We've talked about that enough, Gonzalo.
Yes, we
We're
have.
done
Sorry.
with the Jurassic
But
World
yeah,
stuff.
so
Anyway,
that's like honestly, when you look at horror, you can get like such diversity of storytelling
mhm.
because horror in the end, it's not really a genre.
No, it's not. It's
Just
not a shoebox at all.
exactly. It's
Mhm.
like it's just a feeling that comes with a
Yeah.
specific story.
Mhm.
There can be a lot of different types of horror. We've talked about the fantastic kind of like more gothic,
Mhm.
ghostly, classical horror story. We've talked about the like really subtle, like
Mhm.
psychologically gripping demon possession. We've talked about the really like more campy kind of like
Yeah.
alien invasion
Yeah.
stuff. We've talked about the really like calm monster movie that's just like people being
Yeah.
hunted by this
It's like
unknowable thing.
and even when we're talking about like you have these grand ideas of like human existence and
Yes, yes,
religion and faith and things like that, and things
yes,
like
yes.
Alien and The Exorcist, and it's that whole thing where it's like people we talked about sorry I keep going on about it about the whole
Mm.
sort of reputation of horror, and
Yeah,
they
yeah.
sort of when like Hereditary and stuff like that and Get Out and things like that
Mm.
came out, they're considered amongst what people think is elevated horror. And
Mm,
it's like
mm.
that's not a thing. It's just
No,
horror.
it's
It's
just
like
horror.
there's no such thing as
Yeah,
elevated horror. Horror is
yeah,
just
yeah,
an aspect of cinema or genre of cinema you use to tell a story and to tell ideas and a
yeah.
message. You're then saying like, oh, it's only elevated horror is just good
Yeah.
horror. Then it's just
Yeah,
horror with
yeah,
like
exactly. It's just
more
a
meat
good
on the
movie.
bones.
That's
Like
a
what the hell are
horror.
you talking
Yeah,
about? It's elevated
yeah,
horror. No, it's horror. Horror is horror.
yeah. It's
It's a
just
great
good.
genre. Yes, it's just good.
Yeah,
But
no, the
yeah,
same thing happens with one of my favorite genres,
mm,
sci-fi. Like,
yeah,
I love science fiction. I think it's a brilliant way of exploring like humanity through extremes.
yeah,
And that's something that you get from horror as well. The idea of like putting humanity in these extreme situations and seeing what the fuck happens.
hmm
We've seen it a lot with like in a literal way with survival horrors, where like you literally push the characters to like
hmm
do things maybe they didn't think possible of
yeah,
themselves in
yeah,
good and bad ways. And like it's less about, hey, this is like you have trappings of a genre, you have staples, you have things, you can pay homage to different ways of doing the quote unquote horror way that came before you, but in the end, it's about telling a story about
Yeah.
humanity, and that's what the best films are
Mm-hmm.
about.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that will wrap up our classic horror movie discussion. Perfectly said, Gonzalo. I really
Yes,
like that. Thank
yes.
you. But yeah, so guys, please check out our recommendations. I think they're pretty good.
I think they're good
Yeah,
too.
well, that's just saying.
Yeah.
But
Oh
yes,
man.
now it's time for reviews.
And now, reviews.
So, Gonzalo,
Yes.
Wendell and Wise.
Okay,
Well, I've not
Wild.
seen this film,
Wendell
so
and
it's all up
Wild.
to you. You
Yes.
tell us all about Wendell and Wise.
Okay, so this is a Netflix movie. I hadn't.
Okay.
I remember hearing something about it while I was in pre-production, and it just came out, and I saw it was there, and I was like, hey, to celebrate Halloween, let's do something unsettling and unconventional. Let's have Gonzalo actually watch a movie. So,
But no one else has seen it either. And no one else has anything to say about it.
It's like, wow. So I thought, yeah, I'd creep you all out by actually doing my job and watching a movie and talking about it afterwards. So, Wendell and Wild. This is a stop motion film. It's basically it's a monkey paw production, which already had me going. I was like, oh, this is gonna be good, like
Jordan Peele's production company.
Exactly. And it's the script is co-written by Jordan Peele and Henry Selick, and it is directed by Henry Selick. Henry Selick, if you don't know, he's a legendary stop motion director. He's responsible for A Nightmare Before Christmas. He's responsible for Caroline. He basically, if you watched the stop motion movie when you were a kid, that sort of creeped you out, but also made you want to keep watching. Was
he Nightmare on Elm Street as well, or am I just
maybe actually? Let me check.
I could just be just like you said, stop motion films as a child. He might creepy imagery. I was like, I like Nightmare on Elm Street.
Let me check his filmography. Okay, you're looking into it while I keep talking because I am bad.
Okay, no bother. You carry on through.
But basically, so we have these two powerhouses of both like horror and in general just storytelling. Jordan Peele with Keegan Key is famous for they're famous for their comedic chops as well. He stars in this movie as well, and it's one of those things where you say, hey, this is like a horror comedy for children. It sounds amazing. It sounds like it's going to be a fantastic thing, it sadly wasn't. So I'm not going to spoil this movie. I'm not even going to tell you what it's about because the movie doesn't know what it's about. So I can't, honestly, I will have a really hard time summarizing the plot of this movie. Like, not the plot summary, but like a what's it called? Like an elevator pitch of this movie. I can't really do an elevator pitch of this movie because I don't think it had one. It's really, really hard to tell you what it's about. There's this girl, her parents died when she was a kid, and she's been in foster care, and she's been in the prison system, juvenile detention stuff, and she's going back now to her hometown where her parents died. And that's pretty much all I can tell you, because that's like the first 5 minutes of the film, and then it goes crazy. So the weird thing about this film is that on paper, I should fucking love this film.
Yeah. Stop motion animation. It had you at that.
I love stop motion animation. Yeah. The actual character designs are fucking fantastic. It has an incredible, diverse cast who all do a fantastic job. It's just not good. I mean, Lewis, it's hard. Is
it one of these things where it's like, when we review like really bad films on this show, like you actually struggle to talk about them because there's just like, well, what is there really to say?
The problem with this film, it's kind of like, it kind of makes me mad because it's almost good, but the writing is kind of atrocious. It might be a case of because like seeing the people who actually fucking wrote this movie, I don't understand how it's as bad as it is. But it's completely mad in a very unstructured way. Okay, I'll just give you an example. There's this scene right as the movie starts. We see Wendell and her parents, and they have an accident. And then the movie, like through like the quote unquote credits, like when you start like the kind of intro to the film, you see this kind of like sequence in green silhouette where you kind of go through the things that Wendell has gone through since her parents died up until when we next see her. Her coming back to her hometown. And that scene is fine.
Okay.
But then we see that scene repeat almost beat by beat in that same style 2 more times throughout the movie. And
why? For what purpose?
I don't know. And by the 3rd time, it's also joined with this moment that's supposed to be like the emotional culmination of her character, but it's really not. And it's so weird. You're supposed to feel like this is a girl who is carrying her trauma with her. She feels responsible for the death of her parents, and she carries that on her shoulders. Yes, but you don't see that at all.
Right, okay. No worries.
It doesn't feel like that at all. It's almost like they forgot that was a thing until you have the scene where she's supposed to, confront her, like her bad self, quote unquote, and like what she thinks of herself, and come to terms with everything that's happened. It's really odd because that scene should be very powerful.
Yeah.
It's shot in a very powerful way. It has really nice visual metaphor, but I feel fucking nothing.
Right. So you say that's like she has to facing her trauma and her idea of herself is what the whole film's sort of leading to. But what's in between? How is it enriching that story?
Yes. So it doesn't, because that's almost the midway point of the movie. There's these 2 demons played by Key and Peele, basically voiced by them, and they look like them, and they're the sons of this other demon. He's got a what's it called, like a fairgrounds on his belly. In hell, and in that fairgrounds he tortures the souls of the damned.
Right.
This movie's also supposed to be about the prison system.
Whoa, okay.
Yes, it's supposed to talk about
pretty heavy for a kids film.
Yes.
I mean, I think kids
I
films
love
have
it.
very heavy subject matter, but that's a very specific.
Yes, very specific.
Political.
Again, on paper,
Right.
I fucking love it. Execution-wise, I really don't. Okay, so it's supposed to be about the prison system, and there's, I believe, the parallel they're supposed to be making, because these 2 demons want to create, that have apparently like suggested to their dad, who's this gigantic demon, who has the theme park on the belly, this idea for a fantastic theme park where but they want it to be nice and cool, and he doesn't like that because he wants to torture the souls of the damned. This is supposed to be, I feel, like a mirror of the idea of the American prison system, where people who have done wrong things, instead of being like trying to put them back into society and there's a word for this, rehabilitate, thank you, rehabilitate them, they're actually just like ostracized even more and more in order to make people who make private prisons wealthy. They're the bad guys of the movie, people who make private prisons. So that makes sense. It makes sense. It feels right, The whole arc of the guy is that by the end he's like, oh yeah, my sons are actually onto something, this is a good idea. But that idea is kind of like very surface level, very weird, it's not explored really deeply. Then the bad guys are offensively cartoony in the sense that like the fucking dad, who's like the bad guy, basically is just Black Donald Trump. And I feel like that's a bit too much design-wise. I feel like that was,
it's sort of like when Fantastic Beasts 3 came out this year, The Secrets of Dumbledore, they tried to have a whole political fascist angle that it tried to be a commentary on real-world politics that was just so surface level and terrible.
The thing about this movie is that they actually tried. That's why I can't really hate this movie, because it feels like these 2 artists wanted to say something, and they try to say something. It doesn't feel corporate. It doesn't feel like clean. It doesn't feel like someone went over and said, oh, that's not going to sell. That's why I can't really hate it, because it feels earnest. It's just badly executed. It's poorly executed, and there's like a lack of attention to detail, even in like one thing that's incredibly surface level, and I shouldn't nitpick on because it's probably a stylistic choice, but when you do this kind of stop motion animation, it's the kind that Leica uses, is the kind that was used in the Aardman Pirates movie. Basically, the characters, everything below the half of their eyes is removable. It's a magnetized piece that they change because they animate different mouth shapes and 3D print them, paint them, and then that's what like the animators use to change the mouth expressions and the facial expressions. So normally, after the movie is shot, they go on a layer of visual effects, and they actually remove that because there is a visible gap between the eyes and cutting through the nose. In this movie, they didn't do that, and it's very visible and it's very out there, and you can see the gap there on every character, which I personally feel kind of detracts from the really good character designs that they had. But it's just, for me, a microcosm of that idea of they tried, but it didn't work.
You just didn't nail on the head.
It didn't work.
Right, okay, Gonzalo.
Yes.
We do this for everyone. What would you give this out of 10? What is the score?
Oh, this is a hard one. This is a really hard one because I really want to like this movie. I think I can't call it like a soulless cash grab because it really isn't. It feels like they put love and effort into this film. It feels like they really wanted to say something. And the animation and the visuals are quite lovely, honestly. They did really good stuff with it. The acting is great. All the actors give it their all. I just can't really recommend it because it's sadly very dull. You know I cry very easily in films. I really should have cried in this film several times.
It should have made me cry, but
it should have, but the fact that it didn't caused to the fact that there's like issues with it. I need way more time to actually pinpoint the exact problems with this film, the narrative issues, the way where it doesn't build up to those payoffs. I don't have that time, so I'm just gonna say I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10 because they tried. They tried. If you're interested in the visuals, watch it. If not, don't. It's on Netflix. If you have a Netflix subscription, why not give it a watch? I believe the Monkey Paw Productions have done fucking incredible movies since they started their production company.
Absolutely.
And this one is sadly not one of those.
I will add, Henry Selick did direct Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh, yes, he did.
Tim Burton always gets the credit for that film, and I hate it just because it has his name on the poster.
I really don't like Tim Burton.
He's a producer.
I really don't like Tim Burton as a director or a person.
There you go. Well, Wendell and Wise, 6 out of 10 from Gonzalo there. Sadly. Well,
I really wanted to like this movie, guys.
I'll take your opinion as gospel. Don't worry. But yes, now for Barbarian. This is Zach Krieger, writer-directors. This the indie horror film.
Yes.
And so it starts off, we have Tess, who arrives in Detroit on a rainy, horrible night. She arrives at her Airbnb and is stunned to find a man is already staying in her Airbnb. It's like, how could this be possible? Oh, the whole thing must be double booked. They try and contact the landlord. It's not possible. Keith, who opens the door, I should say, played by Bill Skarsgård, of course. Pennywise the Clown from It, most famously known.
Yeah.
But he is he persists. He persists that Tess should stay, and she's on the verge of leaving, but he persists. No, look, this is what I'll do. There's a lock on your bedroom door. Like, it's fine. I'll sleep on the couch. We'll do all this, right? And then they actually kind of hit it off. It's actually kind of a nice whole little introduction. They have a whole kind of meet cute thing. It's actually quite well done. And then obviously that is not the case. Something seems to be wrong with this house. There is something wrong underneath, and there's dark secrets within this house, and that's all I will say. Because Barbarian is one of the most unpredictable horror films I've seen in recent memory. Wow. At every turn, Krieger takes the film in like wildly different directions, morphing it into like a whole smorgasbord of horror styles and genres. and the film packs so many effective scares and some really horrifying imagery. Like, honestly, you just won't see like from where this film starts to where it ends. You're like, how did we actually get there? Like, oh my god, it's just an insane journey to go on. But the film was also really disarmingly hilarious. Justin Long is in this film. He plays this character AJ, who comes into the film about a third of the way through, who is this whole like despicable yet hilarious guy, and he's just a really big highlight.
He's played in a lot of like indie horror movies recently. Justin Long. It's funny how his career led him to like very straight like 2000 films to just like a bunch of.
To be fair, I think Jeepers Creepers was kind of one of his big breaks. Justin Long, and obviously he's kind of returned to the horror genre here. Its implementation of humor never really distracts from the terror. Like, it's always just used at perfect points just to sort of like elevate the film and just like, alleviate some tension for a bit, and then the film effectively can recreate it and bring it back with just some, really great use of like camera angles. Like, honestly, the film is like has a really punchy editing to it. Like, it's like just really clinical and really effective, really great. There is this whole sort of fantastic. There's a whole scene with a tape measure. Is all I'm going to say. It's also with tape measure that had me laughing so much. Like, it's just genuinely so funny, genuinely such a funny film, but also really perfect, like really good horror film, really scary. But the film's subversive like qualities to it I think are risky, and I think for some people they might not pay off. Like I said, Justin Long character gets introduced about a third of the way through. But the way it's done, I feel like that can either people can either be like, okay, what's going on here, and go along for the ride. And I think it is. I think that the risks do pay off. I think it actually is worth it. But I think at first you can sort of be disarmed by it and be like, I'm actually kind of annoyed they cut away from what was going on and doing this whole thing with Justin Long for a bit. But then it all ties together, all weaves together really, really successfully. And like I said, I actually think the risks do pay off. I think a lesser director, I think if the script was weaker, that definitely would have paid off. That definitely would have been distracting and annoying, and I think could have really hindered the whole film. But it works, so there you go. Risk paid off. Worth it. But yeah, Barbarian. What you get here, you're left with is this wholly just entertaining horror flick that has you guessing like every 10-20 minutes. You're like, where's this going next? And yeah, it's just absolutely a big bang for your buck. Laughs, thrills, scares. Honestly, it's just great. I had a blast with Barbarian. Yeah, no, it really is good. It's very, very postmodern sort of horror, but very effective, really well done. I have to say, like, honestly, I was quite surprised by just how much I just really, really enjoyed this film.
Wow. So
I think it's available.
Sorry. Yeah.
I was just gonna say it's available on HBO Max now in the States, and it literally just got released in cinemas here in the UK. So, what are you saying, Gonzalo?
No, I was gonna ask, what score would you give the Barbarian?
I think I'll give this a solid 8 out of 10. I will say, like, it's about 100 minutes long. And I still think they probably could have trimmed like 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes off, because what they build up to, I think, can just like, right, you could have sped up just a tiny bit. And look, I'm a patient guy. I love long films. You know me, Gonzalo. I'll watch anything. But I was like, you could have just a little bit tighter, made that a bit better. And like I said,
do you think it's because of how? Because you mentioned that like a standout for you was the tightness of the editing.
Yeah,
do you
it's
think
punchy.
that, like,
it's snappy.
Punchy editing that just makes it, when it's not, feel longer.
Yeah, I guess I think that will be will have that effect too. But like under the surface here, as well, you have really like sort of disturbing subject matter here as well. And there actually has a lot to say about sort of like gentrification as well. Like, weirdly enough, like gentrification of areas and sites and stuff like that, and how whole sorts of areas could be sort of just neglected and then turned to something else, into something that
it's
isn't
incredible
good.
how most good horror movies we discuss on this channel have a very interesting like social commentary to them.
Yeah, absolutely. It packs it all. Barbarian's an absolute blast. That's an 8 out of 10 from me.
Wow.
And that will wrap up today's show, guys.
Yes,
so
happy belated Halloween, everybody.
Yes, happy belated
The
Halloween.
spooky month is officially over.
Yes. Well, thank you, Gonzalo, for joining me today.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
No bother at all. And on next week's episode, guys, we're going to be talking about Ryan Coogler. What is his best film to date? I mean, he's only directed a few with Black Panther 2 on the horizon.
I gotta watch.
What?
I still gotta watch one of the 3 movies he's directed.
You do have to watch one of the things, but you, hopefully you will. And hopefully Kyle will as well. I've given him a warning. But yes, thank you so much for listening, guys. And of course, as usual, follow the podcast on Spotify, follow us on YouTube, just go and like all our videos, why don't you? I mean, what else are you going to do with your time? Just help us out, man. Tell everyone about this podcast, it's great. But yes, thank you very much for listening. And look, we just gave our opinions on Barbarian, Wendell Wild, and all those horror classics. But at the end of the day, those were just our unwanted opinions. Thank you very much.